Good morning. My name is Pedro Can from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm very pleased to be here with my friend François Raffi, who is professor at the Nantes University Hospital here in France. And we will have a very interesting session in addressing the issue of do we need triple therapy for everyone and for life? So we will have a very nice outline of speakers. They will talk 10 minutes each. Please keep to your allotted time. And at the end, we will have room for questions and a little bit of debate with the audience. So without further ado, François.
Thank you, Pedro. So we'll have speakers from different countries and different continents, so we'll have the different point of view before we can discuss all together. And the first to present will be Professor Christine Catlama. Christine is head of the AIDS Clinical Research Unit here in Paris at the Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital. She's also the chairman of the Reference Center for Paris Sud. She is working for many years in antiretroviral drugs and vaccine therapy. And as you know, she's also a very important member of ANRS, and she is part of the executive committee of EACS and NEAT ID Foundation and president of AFRAVI. So Christine, you have 10 minutes for treatment initiation, what to expect from dual or monotherapy.
Thank you very much. And thanks to the organizer to have set up this very exciting session and inviting me to talk. So these are my disclosure. So the first question we should address is why we should move a little bit from the triple therapy for everybody. The context has changed. We now initiate earlier, thanks to the universal treatment. As an example, 57% of Pitié-Salpêtrière patients who initiate had greater than 350 and 41 viral load less than 37. We had all the recent and new drugs much more potent and robust. We know that we will need decades of suppressive heart with therefore prolonged drug exposure, and that we need. For that, we need to preserve the option. But the challenges are numerous. Of course, we need to maintain long-life viral suppression. We need to keep heart simple. We need to minimize toxicity to avoid drug-drug interaction and maintain U equal U, non-infectious status. And also, if we can, optimize heart cost. So the goals are well known. We need to test 90-90-90, a maximum of high-risk individuals. We need to treat all HIV-infected patients and maintaining care. And the only dogma is to maintain viral suppression for all. And the question asked here, for that, do we have to give triple therapy for everybody? To Adam, very low CD4, very high viral load, or the recently diagnosed Cyril with high CD4 and a very low viral load? Or John, southern CD4 treated for 12 years and fully suppressed? This is the question we will ask. So moving to mono or dual therapy, which drugs which can rely on? What is needed? Of course, in addition to potency, once daily, preferably high tolerability, we need favorable PK, long life. We need virologic robustness, and we need also low primary resistance rate. Which are the potential drugs to offer that? NRTI, certainly tenofovir, TAF, FTC are still in a course and very excellent candidates. The PI, darunavir, and NRTI, and the new one, integrase inhibitor playing a key role, you will see, and the future drugs. You know, the doravirine, maybe the MK8591. So, I cannot cover everything, even though in initiation there have been not so many initiatives. I will not cover the strategy, the dual therapy with Maraviroc that all clearly show that they were not enough potent. So we will go with the Tunix, the PIS3TC, the integrase plus PI, and the integrase dolutegravir plus 3CC. So, I'm back in the past. single drug regimen, not that many trials, and very pioneer, the Monarch. Monarch compared the monolopinavir to the zidovudine 3TC, the lopinavir. Not surprisingly, the triple therapy performed better, 75% compared to the mono 71. The difference was not so big, but very importantly, in this INRS study, there was sub-studies that start to answer. So who were the good responders, the one who were fully suppressed on monolopy? Clearly, the one who had the lower viral load, the one who became undetectable at week 4 with virus below 400 copies, and the ones who had the lower HIV DNA. So we are starting to touch a little bit on the predictive factors. By the way, back more into the past, and the two-drug regimen as initiation hard is a concept that started 20 years ago. And there was 2 parallel studies. You may have forgot the Trilege one, the French studies, and the ACTG 343. All deal with naive. It was a short induction and maintenance therapy, and the drugs were not in use anymore. It's zidovudine 3TC in Dinavir as a triple therapy, and they compared zidovudine 3TC. Why I'm showing these results? Because in the Trilege, of course, you know the superiority of the 3-drug regimen, but in sub-analysis and in the patient with baseline HIV RNA lower than 30,000 copies, there was no significant difference between the 3 study arms. Similarly, in the CTG 343 in naive patient, again, Diane wrote that there was no difference in the 3 strategy if the CD4 were high and the viral load suppressed at the end of the induction phase. And she notes that also the results of this trial were not somewhat disappointing. They should not discourage future attempts to simplify therapy for HIV. And it was 1998, the last century. So we just pursue more modestly with a 2-nuke approach, pilot one, 20 naive patients with viral load less than 37, CD4 greater than 350, and actually they had nearly 600. And clearly, very pilot, these 20 patients all were suppressed during the course of the studies, 1 stop out and a rebound at 48 weeks. We were able to follow, they are all in this regimen and all are fully suppressed with a median follow-up of 47. But the big breakthrough for me was, and it was from Pedro, the Gardel studies that shows us a few years ago that the dual treatment, lopinavir 3TC, was not different from the triple therapy. So here, very clearly, about 400 naive patients, relatively high viral load, 4.8, CD4 350, no PR resistance. Look at this very nice number, 88% of efficacy followed at 96 weeks, 90%. And on the top, they were able to show that there was a better tolerability in the dual therapy. Then this year, they continue their ideas, and they mixed darunavir and 3TC in the Andes study that Pedro presented on Monday. Smaller number of patients, just interim data at week 24, but darunavir 800 milligram boosted plus 3TC was very comparable to the triple therapy in these South American studies. So, dual therapies start to interest, and particularly François, our chairman. So, within the NEAT network, the question here was to explore the 2 potent drugs, new class, raltegravir and darunavir. They did it in over 800 naive patients, again CD4, about 350 viral load, 4.7. And you can see that the performance of the dual therapy was as good as the one of the triple. The message here, because there was no restriction to limit the viral load at entry, the message that when the CD4 were low and the viral load were high, it was better to prefer a triple heart. So then, a new things. Always, and believe me, I didn't want to favor Pedro's work, but they have been very, very, very innovative. Dual therapy with dolutegravir and 3TC in heart naive. So paddle, 20. Not that many people, but very strong message. And from this patient who start treatment, some of them are having above 100,000 copies, they all achieve, except one, viral suppression. And we are happy to learn at this conference that the 96 clearly show the same results in the 18 patients who maintain this viral suppression. Now we move to the North America, and Babafemi Taiwo will show you on Monday that the combination of dolutegravir 3TC is the same in naive patients in US in a phase 2 single-arm studies, and it shows the data at week 24 that really, again, a very good performance. Whatever the people had above 100,000, they went up to 500,000 or below. So clearly, in that study where there was no resistance except in one for those who are not completely suppressed. Finally, we will have the last word from the large Gemini 1 and 2 phase 3 studies, and we expect the results in 2018. One of the big concerns is whether mono or dual therapy could have an impact, a negative impact, on reservoir and genital compartment. As you can imagine, there is not many studies, but again, in the French experience, mainly in Monarch studies, in Mono, which is a switch studies, there was a similar decrease in the viral DNA in the triple therapy arm compared to the mono or in the BNIC studies. Similarly, as shown by Jad Cohen, the viral replication in genital compartment was not different in Monarch patient on monotherapy compared to triple therapy. And again, we know that once the virus is suppressed in blood, there is little damage. There is no signal, negative signal in genital compartments. So, where are the guidelines? They are slightly introducing dual heart. The European guidelines has introduced raltegravir and darivavir, again only in CD4 greater than 200 and viral load lower than 10 to the 5th log copies. DHSS and IS have introduced, but only in case the patient cannot receive tenofovir, TAF or abacavir. What about in real life? This is our experience in Pitié-Salpêtrière. If you look to the initiation, now we have started last year about 14% in mono or dual therapy, mostly dual therapy. But in patients with suppressive heart, which are over 4,000 patients concerned, now the mono, the single drug, and the two drug represent nearly 25% of our strategy. So, last, maybe not the least, I recommend this very interesting article on the cost effectiveness and the budget impact if we choose, and it's in US, if they would choose a combination of dolutegravir lamivudine. So they compare 3-drug strategy, induction maintenance with 3-drug, then followed by DTG 3TC and DTG 3TC upfront. So taking in account and showing the similar 5-year survival rate in naive patients, if two-drug regimen is a preferred strategy, if the viral suppression is greater than 90%, and if there is a 50% uptake of this strategy, there could be a saving of $550 million US in an induction maintenance strategy and up to $800 million in a upfront DTG 3TC strategy. In switch, if we imagine that 25% of all suppressed patients switch to dolutegravir 3TC, there will be a saving of $3 billion US. That could be maybe put in something else. So, the final thought, 10 minutes. I think individualization of art is a key challenge for lifelong HIV infection, with currently no option for stopping treatment. Dual art with potent and robust drugs is a realistic option for treatment-naive patients with low to moderate viral load and good immune status. Robust options such as darunavir or dolutegravir combined with 3TC are very promising, and more data will be forthcoming in 2018. But new NRTIs, NNRTIs, integrase inhibitors, and other class of drugs with high potency and robust genetic barrier to resistance should be investigated as part of dual art. Let me thank the team at Pitié-Salpêtrière, Pitié and outside, with all my colleagues, Roland Tubena, Marc-Antoine Valentin, cannot name everybody, the virologists, Gilles Pétavin, but also Dominique Costagliola, the International Drug Reduce Strategy aficionados in first line, Pedro Can, Barafemi, also Esteban and Rob Murphy, with whom and Jad Cohen we wrote this opinion paper. And if you like Paris 2017, come back to Paris 2024 for the Olympic Games. I promise I will not be on the podium.
I turn the podium to my colleague, an aficionado, Pedro Can.
Thank you, Francois, and thank you to the two first speakers for excellent presentations. Now it's the turn of Kiat Ruxrungtram. Kiat is professor of medicine at the Chulalongkorn University, senior investigator at HIFNAT, the Thai Red Cross AIDS Research Center, and the scientific chair of the Chula Vaccine Research Center. He has more than 25 years of experience in designing, developing, conducting, and implementing various international, regional, national, and multi-center clinical trials in different phases. So, Kiat, you are asked to teach us about lowering the doses of antiretroviral drugs. What have you learned from studies of efavirenz and protease inhibitors?
Thank you, Peter. I think we have heard all the conference that what to start with. What are to start with is, I think, ideally we love to see the same regimen globally, but it's not real. So you see that in the developed rich resources setting, you have integrase inhibitor, you have nice boosted PI, and in some European guidelines also still recommend lepivarine, but not efavirenz anymore. But in the low resort remitted setting, we still facing on efavirenz as a first line, and the alternative with a number of boosted PI, in this case it's atazanavir and lopinavir. So does doses matter? Can we lower the dose to minimize costs and toxicity? In our center, we have been involved in 3 trials. 2 are initiated in our center, and efavirenz initiated by Kirby Institutes from Australia. I'm going to mention only 2 main studies. Lopinavir is a pediatric study. So let's go with the efavirenz. If we look at the pharmacokinetics, this is in Asian population, mainly in Thai population, you can see that the Caucasians area under the curve exposure is 2.2. When we use the standard dose of efavirenz, we expose about 30% higher. And if we go with 400 milligrams, it's only 2 points. So it's a very similar drug exposure. Interestingly, when you look at the phase 1 DMP 006 trial back many years ago, you can see that with the lower dose of efavirenz, either 200, 400, compared to the 600, you see at the below 50 copy cutoff at 16 weeks. This is a phase 2 study. You can see that 200, 400, 600 is a very comparable result. But the early, few decades ago, we prefer to go with a higher dose, higher maximum tolerated dose. So 600 has been chosen for the clinical licensing. This is the anchor study and published a few years ago. And you can see that in blue is a 400 milligrams, and in orange is a 600 milligrams. The sample size is a non-inferiority design trial, so 300 plus per arm. You can see that at the primary endpoint of below 200 cutoff, you can see that non-inferiority. With the 50 cutoff, again, is a non-inferiority between the two arms. In terms of side effects, particularly efavirenz-related side effect, you can see that it's much less in the lower dose at 400 milligrams. And this durability has been confirmed up to 2 years of the follow-up, 96-week result, the non-inferiority. But interestingly, if you look at the efavirenz-related AE, significantly lower in the lower dose, and the swapping due to the efavirenz-related side effects, you can see that also significantly lower. The other concern is that when you lower the dose, whether this CSF level is not sufficient to suppress the virus, the result is not the case. So both dose of efavirenz study, CSF concentration were considered adequate to inhibit HIV replication. Now, the problem is that when you have a very compelling data of lower dose at 400 for any ethnics, but we didn't have a single tablet regimen available because of I would say, the very slow decision making in terms of the global guidelines to go for 400. And the concern is because related to in some setting that pregnant women and tuberculosis that using rifampicin, 400 may not be the case to go. Now let's move to the another dose optimization of etasanovir. Again, we look at the pharmacokinetics in the Asian type population. You see that this is the Caucasian data, and this is about almost a 50% higher exposure, double higher exposure. And then and we lower the dose to 200, you can see it's a comparable drug exposure. And so we conduct, because by pharmacokinetic only we cannot convince our national authority to allow we use the lower dose. So we conduct a LASA study. This is a low dose versus a standard dose of ritonavir boosted etasanovir in virologically suppressed type adult. And this is the design. You can see this is 1-to-1 randomized to 200 boosted with 100 ritonavir versus 300 versus 100. All patients has been on a previous second-line regimen and been very well suppressed. And you see a very similar thing that we have seen in the efavirenz ENCORE study. You can see that the intention to treat analysis is non-inferiority. If not completed equal to failure, you can see the superiority of the lower dose of etasanovir. And this is related to the patient discontinuation related to the etasanovir toxicity, particularly the jaundice and other, including rashes. Now, how to move for PK efficacy trial into the guideline implementation? But keep in mind, the second study is mainly in the Asian Thai population. But the way we convince our government to support this study together with the Kirby's institutes, because we can reduce the cost of the medication for sure. And this is, you can see that as 5-year saving for up to billions baht. And that's why the guidelines have included equivalent 400s, particularly for those who cannot tolerate single tablet regimen of 600. And the pivarines only for CD4 above 350, and etazanavir boosted 200, 100 for patient has been on second line or boosted PI with viral suppression. But again, you look at the cost beyond the tolerability issue. This is analyzed by Andrew Hughes a long time ago. You can see that if we use equivalence 400 at the first line, you can save $200 million to treat 12 million patients a year. And the second line, if you use etazanavir booster, but that's it with dolutegravir, and you can see that another 500 million US to compare. So I think improved tolerability, why we cannot access to the better regimen, I think is really a way to go. And I'd like to thank a number of funders, including Kirby's and the Thais, and all the study participants and our colleague at HIPNAT, Thai Red Cross Research Center. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Kiat. Very interesting presentation. Now our final speaker, before we start with question and the audience participation, will be Jose Rivas. Jose is currently the head of Infectious Diseases Unit and Research Director of HIV and Infectious Diseases at La Paz Hospital, and as Associate Professor of Medicine at the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, Spain. He has published more than 300 scientific papers. He is one of the main investigators in new ways of approaching HIV treatment. Jose?
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, the organizers, for inviting me to present in this very exciting symposium. These are my conflict of interest. Given the theme of the symposium, I decided to break it down by companies that have shown so far interest only in triple therapy, triple and dual, or the full spectrum triple, dual, and mono. So I disagree a little bit with the question that I've been assigned to answer, because I think we are still not there. I think triple therapy should be in the question, should be what is better for a patient who has been suppressed. It's better to maintain triple therapy or switch to monotherapy or dual therapy. And if we ask regulatory agencies, and you go to the guidance for the industry of the FDA, you will see that all they care about is virological suppression. The goal of antiretroviral treatment should be to maintain viral suppression for as long as possible. It's all about viral load. So this is the first thing that reduced drug regimen have to show, that you have the same virological efficacy than triple therapy. This is our standard. So this is a 10-year history that I have to tell you in 60 seconds. Is PI monotherapy. Yes, this is a lot of data in the slide, but just focus in these two trials. I picked them because there were the two last trials of using darunavir-ritonavir monotherapy. Here's the Protea trial, darunavir-ritonavir monotherapy versus darunavir-ritonavir and two nucleosides in suppressed patients. And this number here is the point estimate of the difference. It was almost 9% in favor of triple therapy, so did not meet non-inferiority. But in UK, they performed the largest trial ever of PI monotherapy. It's called the Pivot clinical trial, and have a very practical endpoint the endpoint was not virological suppression, was the loss of therapeutic options. And you remember, if patients rebound on monotherapy, at least in Europe, we have not seen resistance, so they can be resuppressed by adding the nucleosides. And if you count at the end how many patients have lost therapeutic options, there was no really difference between monotherapy and triple therapy. However, I understand that clinicians don't like their patients to rebound. They want perfect suppression. So this strategy has a very residual use in many centers. So people thought that if monotherapy in suppressed patients was not going to be able to match the efficacy of triple therapy, then adding another drug from a different class will close the gap between monotherapy and triple therapy. And this has not been the case, really. This is dual therapy with a boosted PI plus Maraviroc, or boosted PI plus an integrase inhibitor. And you see here the MARCH clinical trial. It's a very interesting trial, has interesting design, but I'm going to focus in the comparison. They guarantee that patients by proviral DNA were R5 tropic, and they compare boosted PI plus in suppressed patients, boosted PI plus Maraviroc, or boosted PI plus 2 nucleosides. And you see that the point estimate in favor of the triple therapy is huge. It's almost 70% with an increased risk of resistance in the Maraviroc arm. So there was a failure. When patients were suppressed on, in this study, the harness study on atazanavir, ritonavir plus 2 nucleosides, TDF and FTC, and they were randomized to continue the regimen or switch the 2 nucleosides for raltegravir. Again, the trial showed a great benefit of triple therapy, 17% in favor of triple therapy, also with an increased risk of resistance in the nuke-sparing regimen. So these were the data until another approach came by, also following the steps of Gardel in antiretroviral naive patients, that is dual therapy, but instead of dropping the 2 nucleosides, is switching them just with 3TC. Here you have 4 different trials that have been performed in Spain and in Italy, and you can see here the point estimates that you see positive in favor of dual therapy. No matter what boosted PI, atazanavir, ritonavir, darunavir, or lopinavir, these trials met the non-inferiority criteria of minus 12%. I've heard several times in these conferences, this 12% is criticized, now it's 4%, but remember this 4% is for a different endpoint, is virologic failure. Nevertheless, we are going to present at the next EACTS conference a meta-analysis of these trials that include more than 1,000 patients looking precisely at this new endpoint. And the prospects are with these results that we are going to meet that criteria. So the take-home message, the brief summary of this almost 10 years history of trials of trying to reduce the number of drugs in suppressed patients is that Maraviroc or raltegravir cannot substitute 2 nucleosides in suppressed patients treated with a boosted PI, while 3TC apparently can substitute the activity of 2 nucleosides in suppressed patients treated with a boosted PI. I prefer to make a more bold statement. I said this year at CROI is the same, that this is humble, but I think after 30 years of art, we still don't know why only certain combinations control viral replication in the majority of patients. This has been really trials and errors. So at the beginning, people thought this was going to work, but it doesn't. So, and I stress the majority of patients because I think if you take adherence out of the equation, the development of these reduced drug regimens will be much easier. This is a patient from my clinic that I've been following also since the last century. His patient started monotherapy. Here is 2005. He's been 12 years on monotherapy, and these 12 years he has just single blip here. That was it's a blip, it became undetectable very quickly. This is a perfectly adherent patient, almost never miss a dose. And I think this is a critical aspect that why we give triple therapy. The most obvious difference between Maraviroc, raltegravir, and 3TC is the half-life. Intracellular 3TC has a half-life that much more prolonged than valtegravir and maraviroc. And this is critical for forgiveness of the regimens. For covering, if you want to have a successful treatment in the majority of patients, you have to cover patients who do not have perfect adherence. And that is difficult with the forgiveness of the regimen will be decreased if the half-life is short. This is, I have another example that this might be the case with rilpivirine that has a long half-life. You know that this year at CROI, the results of the SWORD trials were presented. This is a very interesting trial. Patients who were taking triple therapy were randomized to suppress, were randomized to dolutegravir rilpivirine, or continuation of triple antiretroviral therapy. And you can see, to the surprise of many, the efficacy rates were very high for this nuc-sparing combination. It was the first time this an adequately powered trial, two trials, nuc-sparing regimen of dolutegravir rilpivirine matched the efficacy of triple antiretroviral therapy without an increased risk of resistance. And at this conference, we've seen the results of the LATE study at 96 weeks. And you know that the LATE is exploring two drugs that are nanoformulated and have long-acting properties, is cabotegravir and rilpivirine. And you saw the results here. And whenever these results are presented, people really focus on the long-acting aspect. People focus on it should be given every 4 weeks or every 8 weeks. But people tend to forget that here we are comparing also dual therapy versus triple therapy. And this is, if the patient comes for the next shot, this is a quite forgiving regimen. This is to be, so it's still not phase 3, but it's a good example that two drugs can match the efficacy also of triple therapy. And also we saw this year at CROI, the results of the Lamidol trial. That is also very interesting. It's dolutegravir, a high genetic barrier drug, combined with 3TC in suppressed patients. You can see that out of 104 patients, 101 maintained suppression without any virologic failure associated to resistance after 48 weeks of follow-up. This is in sharp contrast with what happened when we give dolutegravir monotherapy in suppressed patients. At CROI, we saw that this is a strategy that shouldn't be followed anymore because it has a high risk of resistance and a high risk of virologic failure that apparently goes away when you add 3TC or dual rilpivirine to the combination. So in summary, only two types of reduced drug regimens have matched the efficacy of two nucleosides plus a third drug in switch studies, boosted PI plus 3TC, and dolutegravir and rilpivirine. It's interesting that these regimens contain a reverse transcriptase inhibitor with a long half-life. There is confirmation pending still there is phase 3 ongoing for cabotegravir and rilpivirine long-acting, and also the TANGO trials with dolutegravir and 3TC. So I have to answer the question I've been asked, what is better so far in switch regimens, monotherapy or dual? Clearly, I think I've shown you that it's better dual. And I will challenge also the question after all these presentations, instead of do we need triple therapy for everyone for life, I think the bulk of the evidence support that the question might be, do we need a reverse transcriptase inhibitor with a long half-life for everyone for life? And I'm going to end disagreeing a little bit with the regulatory agencies that only care about viral loads. I know you in the audience that after, if that is matched, many people were going to ask questions about other endpoints like residual viremia, persistent inflammation, immunoactivation, penetrations in reservoirs, toxicity, and cost. And let me finally thank to all the people who have shared slides with me, the people at our HIV unit at La Paz Hospital, and also to all the participants in clinical trials who have made this evidence possible. Thank you.
Gracias, José. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. And now the floor is open for questions and comments. Please go to the microphones and identify yourself and take advantage of this fantastic outline of speakers. Go ahead.
Yeah, Sven Schellberg from Germany. One question to Anna. You raised the question if the regimens where you actually cycle the medication might also be suitable for patients who are older, compared with the young patients you had in there. Keeping in mind that a lot of these patients have co-medications for other kind of diseases, antihypertensive, lipid-lowering agents, you name it, I'm a bit concerned actually that, you know, there's a very fine line of interactions between these medications. Taking these medications out for 1 or 2 days per week may have unpredictable changes in the other medications and impact on that one. Not talking about antibiotics or other things these people commonly actually take. So what do you think about this point?
I'm a pediatrician, but I think we need to challenge. So I do not work with older patients. I work with young people and adolescents. So it's up to you guys to ask your patients if there is a suitable option for them. And in terms of the drug interactions, we need to understand it better. But actually, like, you know, with the current strategies, you know, there is, you know, the options, even when you're choosing the triple ART, you're accounting for the drug interactions. Because the drugs are, like, you know, the levels probably are going down. They're not completely disappearing from intracellular, you know, compartment in the plasma. We need to do it better and study it better. This is a question, a very relevant question. But I think, you know, it's up there, out there, and we need to explore it more.
So maybe any comment by the other speakers, Christine, Rosie, and Pierre?
I mean, in theory, you're right, but in real life, I think many of the French patient, many centers, not only ours, are very favorable to this approach because the Friday. So when we ask about their other meds, they said, you know, before I didn't take, now I take 5 days or 4 days a week, all the things. So we need to measure it. I think I'm not seeing in any hypertensive or any other drug that is not taken for 2 days, which are a big thing, when we know that only 40% are really highly compliant to their medicine. So should be studied.
Thank you. I have a question, Anna, with regards to one of the comments that Jose made with regards to reservoir, profound compartment, and inflammation markers. Do you have any data from breather regarding that? I know that the 4D group presented a poster at the conference showing no impact on DNA and inflammatory markers, but what was a little worrisome is that the CD4 count decreased from 1,000 to 800 significantly with intermittent therapy. So what is your experience in children with that?
I haven't seen the decrease of CD4 count, but I will make Pierre Detruches here so he can comment. But what decreased, it's not a CD4 count, it's a soluble CD4-14, which is an inflammatory marker of monocyte activation. So it's actually a good thing rather than bad. We also studied this in the breather study. We have inflammatory, we tested for 19 inflammatory biomarkers of change between baseline and 48 weeks, and comparing between 2 arms, there was no difference. There was only like decrease, statistically significant decrease in D-dimers, which is also maybe a good thing rather than bad thing, but it's probably also maybe a finding by chance. We did do a reservoirs assessment. I think in 4D, you did PBMC-associated DNA. There was no increase. And in breather, we did as evaluated by total DNA, and there was also no difference. So we did this because people are concerned and they wanted more reassurance, and that's why the inflammatory pathways, pro-activation pathways, and reservoirs were looked at.
And Pierre, maybe Pierre Detruchy, who is a principal investigator for 4D and Quatuor, and also maybe in the semen, because I mean there are questions from patients. If I take intermittently, will I expose my partner to more risk?
Yes, I confirm that we have no decrease in CD4 cells. There is a significant increase at week 48, and no modification of PBMC DNA and inflammatory markers. For the semen, we have not the results in 4-day study, but we plan to make that in a future Quatuor study.
Thank you. I have a question for the panel. Cristina Musini presented a poster at this conference showing that in a retrospective cohort, the ICONA cohort, that patients on monotherapy or dual therapy in switch strategies showed a shrink in the CD4-CD8 ratio, mainly due to an increase in the CD8 number of cells or proportion of cells. Any comments, Cristina or Jose? Or
No, I mean, we are currently studying that, and we didn't see that. There might be a bias because in our experience, and again on approximately 900 patients on mono or dual therapy, they are older than the triple. They have also other markers that are aging more. Just back, we present here the raltegravir etravirine switch combination in patients older than 45 years. Fully suppressed, 160 patient, one failure, no resistance. But on the markers, and you asked the question of the markers, it was much better. So right now, I think there is no negative signal. The only thing we took about CSF was reported in those who had been very late with encephalitis and so on in the past, that in a monotherapy there could be, some rebound. But up to now, I don't know if Jose would agree on that, but there is, in the switch dual, there is really consistent data. And remember, even in the spiral things, there was a very beneficial endothelial markers, many activation markers. So I think it's reassuring.
I think that question has to be answered in a clinical trial. Really, I think those data are interesting, but this is the type of endpoints that have to be looked at. That's what I said. So far, regulatory agencies only ask for biological control, but I think that people are interested in these other endpoints in clinical trials, but I don't think with a cohort we are going to answer this question.
Tyson Li from Beijing University Medical College Hospital, China. So I have a question to Kim. Because recently we have a study for the efavirenz 600 milligram treated Chinese adult patients. And we detected 400 patients, the efavirenz serum concentration is significantly higher than the little report. About 50% of patients, the Chinese patients that take the 6 milligram efavirenz, the serum concentration is higher than 4 UG. So my question is, in your publication, in Encore 1, published in Lancet, I think 2 years before, I don't know the result about serum concentration, the efavirenz serum concentration for 400 gram and 600 gram. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, if I understood you correctly, so you're asking about the TDM, therapeutic drug level equivalence, whether it's useful. Yeah, I would say, if you see the study of 400 data of Encore study, I would suggest you right away that if you have 600 milligram patient taking 600 and have, some CSF side effect, I will reduce to 400 without any need of the TDM level, because in the past we did that, right? But right now you can reduce it to 400 without any TDM monitoring. Yes.
Thank you.
Kiat, if I may just continue with that. You showed the results of Encore 1 with 400 milligram versus 600, and you say the scale-up was important in Thailand, and the guidelines applied that. Well, I was quite surprised to see that you still had 40% of patients with CNS effects. So you don't, even by reducing the dose by 1/3, you still see a lot of patients with CNS effects. So, what is your experience in
I think genetically, some patients still have pharmacogenomics issue of high level of equivalence. So in that case, but again, because even our guidelines saying that 400 can be as a first line.
Go lower?
We reduce to 300. But it means you don't have 300 pills, so you have to cut 600 to 300, but it worked very well.
Kiat, I have a follow-up question on that. What's the level of primary resistance to non-nucleosides in Thailand?
I'm sorry.
What is the proportion of baseline resistance to non-nucleoside in your country?
Asia, yeah. It depends. The primary drug resistance it depends on which population. If it's the MSM, it's, I think it's 3% or approaching 5%. So we have to be careful. So MSM with a multi-partner, we prefer to do. Although the guideline, we are not support drug-resistant baseline for free yet, but we prefer to do a baseline drug-resistant testing. Yes.
Thank you. Simon Collins from Asia VI Base. So I think we're getting to see really tentative data that for lots of people this could be a potential option. And a clinical option in people who are getting older and have complications and more taking medicines for all sorts of other things. But two examples that are quite similar, it reminds me more of treatment interruptions and the question of when to start treatment. And so I'd feel much more confident if we had a really large randomized study. And that should be affordable given the costs that would be saved by using reduced treatment. Does anybody know of any plans for such a large randomized study at different options?
No, we tried, in France, but the first step was to prove that each of the concepts was working. But I'm sure it would be time to compare the short cycle, dolutegravir plus something and another approach. From my point of view, there is not yet support from companies, maybe start, because I think it's very important to move forward dual combination, even with the new drugs. And the agency are right now, even in France, but we did not succeed in having these big things. We will have the catcher, but we need 3-arm studies like in the time of the 3-leg and SCTG to compare different approach with all more in real life than those very complex phase 2-3 regimen.
But I think we need to be careful, particularly maybe not in this audience, because here we are praying to the converted. In some way, people are interested in this type of strategies. When this message spreads out, we need to be careful in terms not to apply what we have learned with one strategy to any other drugs. For instance, efavirenz has a long life, so a 4 days approach, 5 days approach might be good. That this does not necessarily apply to any other drug. The same happens with the 2 drug regimens. Jose very elegantly showed that what works with 3TC doesn't work with umanabinib, for instance. So we need to be careful before we take firm conclusions in terms of recommending these approaches to the guidelines. No?
Well, in fact, in the Quature study, 680 patients, 640 patients will be enrolled, and we will have at least 220 on integrase and a lot of on PI. So we will do a subgroup analysis for the different classes of drug.
That's the way to go.
One.
Orofino from Italy. For Professoressa Catalama, in your talk, you do not consider atazanavir-based regimen dual therapy. So is a personal position, a French position, or do you use in your center atazanavir-based dual therapy? Thank you.
Yeah. No. I have only 10 minutes, and a talkative person, so I was very stressed. But you're right. Atazanavir is an excellent drug. Atazanavir has an excellent PK. Atazanavir is boosting dolutegravir very nicely and raltegravir. And I can tell you, I use a lot of atazanavir as a booster PI, unboosted atazanavir. So there is also the Atlas studies, but I had the initiation things. So no, atazanavir is and the last data from CROI suggests that the cardiovascular risk attached to the PI is not as So we have the reduced dosage of 400, and I can tell you that there are even people with lower dosage. No, clearly for me, the two remaining PI are darunavir and atazanavir.
Rosie, I have a question for you regarding one of your last slide when you said, do we need an RTI? Was it an RTI?
A reverse transcriptase inhibitor.
Okay,
no, it's not
because so yeah, because I mean in SWORD it's with no NRTI. So really, all data shows that when you get off RTI inhibitors with Maraviroc or Altegravir, you fail, even with the best boosted PIs.
Right.
So, I mean, is there any rationale behind that?
It's a question that I think nobody knows the answer, you know. But I don't know if it's. I wanted to be a little bit provocative, saying an RT inhibitor because the dolutegravir rilpivirine has worked very well, and also when 3TC is on board, it has the better results. But I don't know if this is the life cycle or is just the viral and the half-life. If we had another class with a very long half-life, perhaps could be the same. Still, I think, Francois, if I answer you why, you know, darunavir, raltegravir underperform in some patients, we still will not know. We don't know the answer. And I think, you know, after having thought about this a lot, I think it's the half-life and the forgiveness of the regimen is critical. I think that can be achieved with right now only with RT inhibitors.
Yes, I think the question is well taken, but for me, at this moment, what is the most mysterious thing is the 3TC. You know, we have been living with 184V fully resistance, and now through Moby Deep, through Dolulam, that we did not mention, dolutegravir plus 3TC, despite a long history of resistance, including 184V, it's better in Moby Deep than with mono alone. So there is something magical about the 3TC. I would not say it's
But Christine, that was perfect until SWORD studies, because rilpivirine did the same.
No, but the question is, of course, rilpivirine and etravirine, raltegravir did perfectly well. So the question around 3TC is there an interest to maintain 3TC in a context of prior resistance to 3TC, because many of our patients did that. So this is the key question. Of course, there are many other options than something plus 3TC. Now, long-term, what about long-term tenofovir, TAF? We don't know, I mean, but there is some data after 15, 20 years showing that mitochondrial toxicity, even minimal, is still a little bit there. So I think it's good to move to other strategy.
Thank you. Paul DeMonico from CHAI. I want to stick with the conversation around the half-life of the inhibitors. So you can walk across all the classes, and it does seem that the half-life is a key parameter, especially when you're worried about adherence. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are, even if they're from preclinical studies on the new Merck drug that's in the clinic, that's a translocation inhibitor. Yeah, translocation inhibitor, because it does have a different mechanism where it's freezing the enzyme, and I'm curious whether you think that this might be the start of another mechanism that would help.
Well, I think it's a new. They will other colleagues will comment, but I think it's a new way to block the reverse transcriptase, and probably it will offer new avenues, and also because of the very, very long half-life, probably new ways of administration with the intrinsic properties of the drug, probably weekly administration or twice weekly. So, and probably it will change the paradigm in the future. But it's still very premature because we are still in phase 2.
Yeah, and we can add that even this drug, if it's a nuke, I mean, not only a long half-life, fantastic, but also high potency. And this is a nuke who now is more than 2 log single dose. So we've never seen that.
And it's also amenable to nanoformulation, so we could forecast that maybe if everything works okay, that we will see this drug delivered by implantable devices, and maybe the patients will come every 6 months to the hospital to get treatment. So it sounds like utopia now, but it might be possible in the next future.
So, but what to combine with? It won't be a mono.
For sure.
So, but I think it was a good point raised that we are maybe going to as Christine said, we need to study these new drugs also as part of dual regimen in the future because of their potency.
No, I just wanted to come, should not be the animation, but come back to something key that said Jose, looking at this patient on a monodarunavir 1 blips. And I think we had the same experience with this mono, very long term. And some of the patients are, and we published not published, we show in a conference, the monodaru light, 600 milligram, and some people are even at 400. For me, the mystery is with these long years, 15 years of suppression, you need minimal drugs, and are controlled with not in everybody, but singles are very interesting. But if you don't get this minimum, they rebound. So we have still a lot to learn about what is needed after years of viral suppression to control the...
A few days.
A few days, yes. A few days.
Okay. Do we have further questions? If not, I would like to, or we would like with Francois to ask all the speakers, starting by Jose, to give us the take-home messages of this session in order to avoid misconceptions and people don't walk out of this room saying this expert said treat everybody 4 days a week with any drug and use one, etc. So,
Jose, so my take-home message is stay tuned. This is going to be the biggest debate in antiretroviral therapy. Are you giving your patients one drug more than they need, or this issue of reducing the drug or regimen, reducing the number of drugs puts your patients at risk? So we need data.
I think. I think my take-home message is that don't giving up even you in a different resources setting. You have to do good research and make sure that your patient will get the best option that available. Thank you.
Anna?
So my take-home message: enjoy the weather today. But if serious, I think a short cycle therapy is a very interesting strategy. And with the current art, which is really strong, we may not need daily treatment. And we are all different. We are all individuals. So with individualized care, this strategy can take place in our policies. However, it's maybe too early, and will be very exciting to find out the results of the French randomized control trial. And we're also working on another trial that we want to do in the limited settings to answer these outstanding questions.
Christine?
Yeah, lifelong HIV will be a lifelong, many decades. And as Jose, don't give too much, less, maybe more than 4. Individualize your patient. And if you don't do that, your patient will adjust the regimen.
So my message is don't compromise virologic efficacy. Virologic suppression is the dogma. And the virus, maybe drugs are forgiving, but the virus is not forgiving. So don't compromise efficacy with a regimen which are not fully proven.
Well, my final comments would be that we are in a situation in the world in which we are aiming to the 90-90-90 goals. We are very happy that we have 19.5 individuals on treatment, but we need to put on treatment at least 10.1 million more in the next 3 years, which is an extremely difficult task. Anything that we can do in the context of a restricted fiscal environment in which funding is insufficient to achieve our goals could be very good. And you need to be reminded that any type of drug reduction, be it reduction the doses that Kiet was telling us, reducing the days of exposure, as Anna showed us, or reducing the number of drugs as Christina and Jose were telling us, means less APIs, less active pharmaceutical ingredient, which is the main driver of the cost. And if we can treat for the same amount of money more patients, we are doing a very good to the fight against the epidemic. I think that this type of studies that we have seen in some way are disturbing us and are taking out us of our comfort zone. We are very comfortable. Yeah, 3 drugs for everybody, you know, fixed dose combination, you use a triplet in some part of the world, you use Triomec in another part of the world, or Stribilt, or TAF FTC with the Bictegravir in the future. That's okay. But I think that we need to think in the wide world and think about yourselves. If you would be a patient, what would be your desire? Less drugs, less exposure, less complexity. So don't do this at home so far. Be careful, identify the appropriate patients for this type of strategies, and even being all of us aficionados, as Christina said, in terms of reducing the amount of drug exposures, we need to be careful because Francois said the right word. Do not compromise potency for any other strategy. So with that, we thank very much to our speakers and our co-chair, and you for being here.